Alright, and I'll make that the hour. So, there we are, back on screen. So, hello to anyone who is out there, or is not, of course. As always, I am SkitterSkreetch, and you can call me Skitter. Something a little bit different today. We have got redeems, as we were told so graciously by Abba last stream. Oh, thank you kindly, Les. As we were saying, yeah, we've got redeems now, as Les has just pointed out, and made me realise I don't have my water at hand. Good catch, Les, you caught me lacking. Ooh. And now I've got, what was I saying? Yeah, we've got redeems on. What I was going to say is, I've set up audio things for some of them, so hopefully what should happen is you should hear them normally on the stream. What might be happening, however, is because I've got desktop audio enabled, you might be getting the sound alerts twice. If that's the case, let me know. I do have something set up to hopefully abate that. So yeah, let me know if you're getting double sound from the redeems. Yeah, thank you for the hydrate, Les. I am quenched. Yeah. Trying to think what else. Yeah, so got a few little redeems set up. Oh, good. And that's working fine then, which means I don't have to worry about updating my thing to work properly. There's always a relief because I don't understand how any of it works, and Lamp will try and explain it to me, and then I have to listen to Lamp talk. Anyway, but yeah, but I should have a handful of little redeems set up, hopefully all of which work, some of which inevitably will not. I've done some of my emotes, some of them, which I think you got 4 of them as followers. I left 1 slot just in case someone had a good idea for one. But I filled them with very necessary things like invoking the eye and a mysterious pouch. That's a good one, a mysterious pouch. Very important one, that one. Yeah. Trying to think what else has happened since last stream. Not much really. Yeah. Took the day off, rested, recovered my throat. Did a few little bits. Other than that, I think we're mostly business as normal. Yeah, that's a good. That there is a good emo. Funny enough, I had that little image ready from my first Londonathon, so yeah. And I thought that's a good emo. There'll be some use for that. People will come to this stream just for that emo. They'll come to here and they'll come from far around just to have that little mysterious pouch emo. That's going far that way. The rest of them, you know. We'll figure it out, but yeah. But yeah, why are we here? Oh yes, so I'm here today to read some ghost stories by M.R. James. Where is? There we are. Oh, not too far forward. There we are. So last time we did these, we got through 3 of them. Somehow I wound up reading the story of disappearance and an appearance in place of a warning to the curious. I don't know how I got them mixed up, but I did. But yeah, that was the one I read rather than a warning to the curious. So I've got that to read as well as the ash tree and the rose garden. So the goal is to get through the 3 of them today, which shouldn't be too long, probably 2-hour stream. and we'll see how we get on with all of my new redeems going off, which, you know, I'm sure will be fine and definitely won't interrupt things and cause problems and troubles. Unless they do, in which case, well, they do. Yeah. I think that's about it though. So, yeah, unless anyone has anything else they want to say. As always, of course, if I go too fast and miss something, or you want me to go something over, or you just have a comment, feel free to let me know and I'll stop and try and go back. But otherwise, we will be reading as normal, unless otherwise interrupted. So yeah. A Warning of the Curious. The place on the east coast, which the reader is asked to consider, is Seaburg. It is not very different now from what I remember it to have been when I was a child. Marshes intersected by dikes to the south, recalling the early chapters of Great Expectations. Black fields to the north, merging into heath, fir woods, and above all gorse inland. A long seafront and street. Beyond that, a spacious church of flint with a broad, solid western tower and a peal of 6 bells. How well I remember their sounds on a hot Sunday in August, as our party went slowly up the white, dusty slope of the road towards them. For the church stands at the top of a short, steep incline. They rang with a flat, clacking sort of sound on those hot days, but when the air was softer, they were mellower too. The railway ran down to its little terminus farther along the same road. There was a gay white windmill just before you come to the station, and another down near the shingle at the south end of the town, and yet others on higher ground to the north. Their cottages are bright red brick with slate roofs. But why do one cumber you with these commonplace details? The fact is, they come crowded to the point of the pencil when it begins to write a Seaburg. I should like to be sure I had allowed the right one to get on the paper, but I forgot. I have not quite done with the word painting business yet. Walk away from the sea and the town, past the station, and turn up the road to the right. It is a sandy road, parallel with the railway, and if you follow it, it climbs to somewhat higher ground. On your left, you have now got northward, is a heath. On your right, the side towards the sea, is a belt of old firs, wind-beaten, thick at the top, with the slope that old seaside trees have. Seen on the skyline from the train, they would tell you in an instant, if you did not know it, that you were approaching a windy coast. Well, at the top of my little hill, a line of these firs strikes out and runs towards the sea. There is a ridge that goes that way, and the ridge ends in a rather well-defined mound commanding the level fields of rough grass, and a little knot of fir trees crowns it. And here you may sit on a hot spring day, very well content to look at the blue sea, white windmills, red cottages, bright green grass, church tower, and the distant Martello Tower on the south. As I have said, I began to know Seaburg as a child, but a gap of a good many years separates my early knowledge from that which is more recent. Still, it keeps its place in my affections, and any tale of it I pick up have an interest for me. One such tale is this. It came to me in a place very remote from Seaburg, quite accidental, from a man who I had been able to oblige, enough in his opinion to justify his making me his confidant to this extent. I know all that country, more or less, he said. I used to go to Seaburg pretty regular for golf in the spring. I generally put up at the Bear with a friend, Henry Long, who's, you know him perhaps? Slightly, I said. And we used to take a sitting room and be very happy there. Since he died, I haven't cared to go there. I don't know that I should anyhow, after the particular thing that happened on our last visit. This was in April 19X. We were there, and by some chance we were almost the only people in the hotel, so the ordinary public rooms were practically empty, and we were the more surprised when, after dinner, our sitting room door opened and a young man put his head in. We were aware of this young man. He were rather a rabbity, anemic subject, like hair and like eyes, but not unpleasing. So when he said, "I beg your pardon, is this a private room?" we did not growl and say, "Yes, it is." But Long said, or I did, no matter which, "Please, come in." "Oh, may I?" he said, and seemed relieved. Of course, it were obvious that he wanted company, and as he were a reasonable kind of person, not the sort to bestow his whole family history on you, we urged him to make himself at home. "I dare say you find the other rooms rather bleak," I said. Yes, he did. But it really too good of us, and so on. That being got over, he made some pretense of reading the book. Along with playing patience, so were writing. It became plain to me after a few minutes that this visitor of ours was in rather a state of fidgets or nerves, which communicated itself to me, and so I put away my writing and turned to it, engaging him in talk. After some remarks, which I forget, he became rather confidential. You'll think it very odd of me, this was the sort of way he began, but the fact is I've had something of a shock. Well, I recommended a drink of some cheering kind, and we had it. The waiter coming in made an interruption, and I thought our young man seemed very jumpy when the door opened. But after a while he got back to his woes again. There were nobody he knew in the place, and he did not happen to know who we both were. Turned out there was some common acquaintance in town, and really he did want a word of advice if we didn't mind. Of course we both said by all means, or not at all, and Long put away his cards, and we settled down to hear what his difficulty was. It began, he said, more than a week ago, when I bicycled over to Froston, only about 5 or 6 miles, to see the church. I'm very much interested in architecture. It's got one of those pretty porches with the niches and shields. I took a photograph of it, and then an odd man who was tidying up in the churchyard came and asked if I'd care to look into the church. I said yes, and he produced a key and let me in. There wasn't much inside, but I told him it was a nice little church, and he kept it very clean. But, I said, the porch is the best part of it. We were just outside the porch then, and he said, "Ah, yes, that is a nice porch. And do you know, sir, what the meaning of that coat of arms is there?" It was the one with 3 crowns, and though I'm not much of a herald, I was able to say yes. I thought it was the old arms of the King of East Anglia. "That's right, sir," he said. "And do you know the meaning of those 3 crowns, Sir John?" I said I'd no doubt it was known, but I couldn't recollect to have heard it myself. "Well then," he said, "for all you're a scholar, I can tell you something you don't know. Them's the 3 holy crowns, which were buried in the ground near by the coast to keep the Germans from landing. Ah, I can see you don't believe that. But I tell you, if it hadn't been for one of them holy crowns being there still, them Germans would have landed here time and again. They would have landed with their ships and killed man and woman and child in their beds. Now then, that's the truth, what I'm telling you, that is. If you don't believe me, you ask the rector. There he comes, you asked him that," I says. I looked around, and there was the rector, a nice-looking old man, coming up the path. And before I could begin assuring my old man, who was getting quite excited that I didn't disbelieve him, the rector struck in and said, "What's all this about, John?" "Good day to you, sir. Have you been looking at our little church?" So then there was a little talk, which allowed the old man to calm down, and then the rector asked him again what was the matter. "Ah," he said, "it wasn't nothing, only I was telling this gentleman he'd ought to ask you about unholy grounds." "Ah, yes, to be sure," said the rector. "That's a very curious matter, isn't it? I don't know whether the gentleman is interested in our old stories, eh?" "Oh, he'll be interested fast enough," says the old man. "He'll put his confidence in what you tell us himself. Why, you know William Egger yourself, father and son too." And I put a word in to say how much I should like to hear all about it, and before many minutes I was walking up the village street with the rector, who had 1 or 2 words to say to parishioners, and then to the rectory, where he took me into his study. He had made out on the way that I really was capable of taking an intelligent interest in a piece of folklore, and not quite the ordinary tripper. He was very willing to talk. It was rather surprising to me that the particular legend he told me has not made its way into print before. His account of it was this. There has always been a belief in these parts of the 3 holy crowns. The old people say they were buried in different places near the coast to keep off the Danes or the French or the Germans. And they say that one of these 3 was dug up a long time ago, and another has disappeared by the encroaching of the sea, and one's still left doing its work, keeping off invaders. Well now, you've read the ordinary guides and histories of this country, you will remember perhaps that in 1687 a crown, which was said to be the crown of Redwall, King of the East Angles, was dug up at Rendlesham, and alas, melted down before it were even properly described or drawn. Well, Rendlesham isn't on the coast, but isn't so very far inland, and it's on a very important line of access. And I believe that is the crown that people mean when they say one has been dug up. Then one in the south you don't want me to tell you, where there was a Saxon royal palace which is now under the sea, eh? Well, there was the 2nd crown, I take it. And up beyond these 2 they say lies the 3rd. They say what it is, of course, I asked. He said, "Yes, indeed, they do, but they don't tell." And his manner did not encourage me to put the obvious question. Instead of that, I waited a moment and said, "What did the old man mean when he said you knew William Egger, as if that had something to do with the crowns?" "To be sure," he said. "Now that's another curious story. These Eggers, it's a very old name in these parts, but I can't find that they were ever people of quality or big owners. These Eggers say, or said, that their branch of the family were the guardians of the last crown. A certain old Nathaniel Egger was the first one I knew. I was born and brought up quite near here, and he, I believe, camped out at the place during the whole of the war. of 1870. William, his son, did the same, I know, during the South African War, and young William, his son, who has only died fairly recently, took lodging at the cottage nearest the spot, and I've no doubt hastened his end, for he was consumptive by exposure and night watching. And he was the last of that branch. It was a dreadful grief to him to think that he was the last, but he could do nothing. The only relations at all near him were in the colonies. I wrote letters for him to them, imploring them to come over on a business very important to the family. There has been no answer. So the last of the Holy Crowns, if it's there, has no guardian now. That was what the rector told me, and you can fancy how interesting I found it. The only thing I could think of when I left him was how to hit upon the spot where the crown was supposed to be. I wish I'd left it alone. There was a sort of fate in it, for as I bicycled back past the churchyard wall, my eye caught a fairly new gravestone, and on it was the name of William Ager. Of course I got off and read it. It said that of this parish, died at Seaburgh, aged 28. There was, you see, a little judicious questioning in the right place, and I should at least find the cottage nearest the spot. Only I didn't quite know the right place to begin my questioning at. Again, that was fate. It took me to the curiosity shop, down that way, you know. I turned over some old books, and if you please, one was a prayer book of 1740-odd, in a rather handsome binding. I'll just go and get it, it's in my room. He left us in a state of some surprise. We had hardly time to exchange any remarks when we were back, patting and handed us the book. Opened the flower leaf, on which was in a scraggly hand, Nathaniel Ager is my name, and England is my nation. Seaburgh is my dwelling place, and Christ is my salvation. When I am dead and in my grave, and all my bones are rotten.
Oh, the rat!
Ah! Thank you for checking in, Abby. You greeted the rat today. Nice to have you in place. When I am dead and in my grave and all my bones are rotten, I hope the Lord will think on me when I am quite forgotten. This poem was dated 1754. There were many more entries of Agers, Nathaniel, Frederick, William and so on, and then William in 19X. You see, he said, anybody would call it the greatest bit of luck. I did, but I don't now. Of course I asked the shopman about William Ager, and of course he happened to remember that he lodged in a cottage in the North Field and died there. This was just talking the road from me. I knew which the cottage must be. There was only one sizable one about there. The next thing was to scrape some sort of acquaintance with the people, and I took a walk that way at once. A dog did the business for me. He made at me so fiercely I had to run out and beat him off, and they naturally begged my pardon and we got him to talk. I had only to bring up Ager's name and pretend I knew, or thought I knew something of it, and the woman said how sad it was him dying so young, and she was sure it came of him spending the night out of doors in the cold weather. Then I had to say, did he go out on the sea at night? And she said, oh no, it was on the hill yonder with the trees in it, and there I was. I know something about digging in these barrows. I've opened many of them in the down country. That was with the owner's leave and in broad daylight, and with men to help. I had to prospect very carefully here before I put in a spade in. I couldn't trench across the mound with these odd firs growing there. I knew there would be awkward tree roots. Still, the soil was very light and sandy and easy, and there was a rabbit hole, or so that might have developed into a sort of tunnel. And going out and coming back at odd hours to the hotel was going to be the awkward part, and I made up my mind about the way to excavate. I told the people that I was called away for the night and spent it out there. I made my tunnel. I won't bore you with the details of how I supported it and filled it in when I'd done. But the main thing is that I got the crown. Naturally, we both broke into exclamations of surprise and interest. I, for one, had long known about the found end of the crown at Rendlesham and had often lamented its fate. No one has ever seen an Anglo-Saxon crown, at least no one had. But our man gazed at us with a rueful eye. Yes, he said, and the worst of it is I don't know how to put it back. Put it back? We cried out. Why, my dear sir, you've made one of the most exciting finds I've ever heard of in the country. Of course it ought to go to the jewel house or the tower. What's your difficulty? If you're thinking about the owner of the land and treasure trove and all that, we can certainly help you through. Nobody's going to make a fuss about technicalities in a case of this kind. Probably more was said, but all he did was put his face in his hands and mine. I don't know how to put it back. At last Long said, you'll forgive me, I hope, if I seem impertinent, but are you quite sure you've got it? I wasn't to ask much the same question myself, for of course the story did seem a lunatic's dream when one thought it over. But I hadn't quite dared to say what might hurt the poor young man's feelings. However, he took it quite calmly, really with a calm of despair, you might say. He sat up and said, oh, yes, there's no doubt of that. I have it here in my room, locked up in my bag. You can come and look at it if you like. I went over to bring it here. We were not likely to let the chance slip. We went with him. His room were only a few doors off. The boots were just collecting shoes in the passage, or so we thought. Afterwards we were not sure. Our visitor, his name was Paxton, were in a worse state of shivers than before, and he went hurriedly into the room and beckoned us after him, turned on the light and shut the door carefully. Then he unlocked his kit bag and produced a bundle of clean pocket handkerchiefs in which something were wrapped, laid it on the bed and undid it. I can now say I have seen an actual Anglo-Saxon crown. It was silver, as the Rendlesham one is always said to have been. It was set with some gems, mostly antique, intaglios and cameos, and were of rather plain, almost rough workmanship. In fact, were like those you see on the coins in some of the manuscripts. I found no reason to think that it were later than the 9th century, or intentionally interested, of course. I wanted to turn it over in my hands, but Paxton prevented me. "Don't you touch it," he said. "I'll do that." And what a sight that was, I declare. Dreadful to hear. He took it up and turned it about, so that we could see every part of it. "Seen enough," he said at last, and we nodded. He wrapped it up and locked it in his bag, and still looking at us dumbly. "Come back to our room," Long said, "and tell us what the trouble is." He thanked us and said, "Will you go first and see if the coast is clear?" That wasn't very intelligible, for our proceedings hadn't been after all very suspicious, and the hotel, as I said, were practically empty. However, we were beginning to have an inkling of, well, we didn't know, and anyhow, nerves were infectious, so we did go, first peering out as we opened the door and fancying, I found we both had the fancy, that a shadow, or more than a shadow, but it made no sound, passed from before us, to one side as we came out in the passage. "It's all right," we whispered to Paxton, whispering seemed the proper tone, as we went with him between us back to our sitting room. I would prepare him, when we got there, to be ecstatic about the unique interest of what we had seen. When I looked at Paxton, I saw it would be terribly out of place, and left him to it to begin. "What is to be done?" was his opening. Long thought it right, as he explained to me afterwards, to be obtuse, and said, "Why not find out who the owner of the land is and inform—" "Oh, no, no!" Paxton broke in impatiently. "I beg your pardon. You've been very kind, but don't you see it's got to go back? And I daren't be there at night. The daytime's impossible. Perhaps they do you don't see. Well, then the truth is that I've never been alone since I touched it." I began in some fairly stupid comment, but Long caught my eye and I stopped. Long said, "I think I do see, perhaps, but why wouldn't it be a relief to tell us a little more clearly what the situation is? Then it will come out." Paxton looked over his shoulder and beckoned to us to come nearer to him, and began speaking in a low voice. We listened most intently, of course, and compared notes afterwards, and I wrote down our version, so I'm confident I have what he told us almost word for word. He said, "It began when I was first prospecting, and put me off again and again. There was already somebody, a man, standing by one of the firs. This was in daylight, you know. He was never in front of me. I always saw him with the tail of my eye on the left or the right, and he was never there when I looked straight for him. I would lie down for quite a long time and take careful observations and make sure there was no one else, and then, when I got up and began prospecting again, there he was. And he began to give me hints besides, for whenever I put the prayer book, short of looking it up when I did at last, when I come back to my room it was always out on my table, open at the fly-leaf where the names are, and one of my razors across it to keep it open. I'm sure he just can't open my bag or something more would have happened. You see, he's light and weak, but all the same I daren't face him. Well then, when I was making the tunnel, of course it was worse, and if I hadn't been so keen I should have dropped the whole thing and run. It was like someone scraping at my back all the time. I thought for a long time it was only soil dropping on me, but as I got nearer, the crown was unmistakable. And when I actually laid it bare and got my fingers into the ring of it and pulled it out, there came a sort of cry behind me. Oh, I can't tell you how desolate it was, and horribly threatening too. It spoiled all of my pleasure in life. I cut it off in that moment, and if I hadn't been the wretched fool I am, I should have put the thing back and left it. But I didn't. The rest of the time was just awful. I had hours to get through before I could decently come back to the hotel. First I spent time sealing up my tunnel and covering my tracks, and all the while he was there, trying to thwart me. Sometimes, you see him, and sometimes you don't, just as he pleases, I think. He's there, but he has some power over your eyes. Well, I wasn't off at the spot very long before sunrise, and then I had to get back to the junction for Seaborough and take the train back. And though it was daylight fairly soon, I don't know if that made it much better. There were always hedges or gorse bushes or park fences along the road, some sort of cover I mean. It was never easy for a second. Then when I began to meet people going to work, they always looked behind me very strangely. It might have been they were surprised at seeing anyone so early, but I didn't think it was only that. I don't know. They didn't look exactly at me. And the porter of the train was like that too. The guard held open the door after I'd got onto the carriage, just to see whether there was someone else coming, you know. "Oh, you may be very sure it isn't my fancy," he said with a dull sort of laugh, and then he went on. And if ever I do get it built back, he won't forgive me, I can tell that. And I was so happy I thought I'd go. He dropped into a chair, and I believe he began to cry. We didn't know what to say, but we felt we must come to rescue somehow, and so, it really seemed the only thing. We said he was so set on putting the crown back in its place, we would help him. And I must say that after what we had heard, it did seem the right thing. If these horrid consequences had come on this poor man, might there not really be something in the original idea of the crown having some curious power bound up with it, to guard the coast? At least that was my feeling, and I think it belongs too. I thought we're very welcome to Paxton anyhow. When could we do it? It was near 10:30. Could we contrive to make a late walk plausible to the hotel people not that very night? We looked out the window. There was a brilliant full moon, the Paschal moon. Long undertook to tackle the boots and appropriate them. He would have said that we should be not much over an hour, and if we did find it so pleasant we stopped out a bit longer, we would see that he didn't lose by sitting up. Well, we were pretty regular customers of the hotel, and he did not give us much trouble. We would consider it by the servants to be not under the mark in the way of tips, and so the boots was propitiated and let us out to the seafront, and remained, as we heard later, looking after us. Paxton had a large coat over his arm, under which was the wrapped-up crown. So we were off on this strange errand before we had time to think how very much out of the way it was. I've told this part quite shortly on purpose, for it really does represent the ace for which we set with our plan and took action. The shortest way is up the hill and through the churchyard, Paxton said, as we stood a moment before the hotel, looking up and down the front. There were nobody about, nobody at all. Sea were out of the season, an early, quiet place. But we can't go along the dyke by the cottage because of the dog, Paxton also said, when I pointed to what I thought a shorter way along the front and across 2 fields. The reason he gave were good enough. We went up the road to the church and turned in by the churchyard gate. I confess to having thought that there might be some lion there who might be conscious of our business, but if it was so, they were also conscious that one who was on their side, to say land, had us under surveillance. We saw no sign of them, but under observation we felt we were, as I have never felt it at another time. Especially it was so when we passed out of the churchyard into the narrow path with close eye edges, through which we hurried as Christian did through that valley, and so got out into open fields. Then along edges, though I'd sooner have been in the open when I could see if anyone visible beyond me, over a gate or two, and then a swerve to the left, taking us up to the ridge, which ended in that mound. As we neared it, Erin Long felt, and I felt too, there were what I can only call dim presences waiting for us, as well as a far more actual one attending us. Of Paxton's agitation all this time I can give you no adequate picture. He breathed like an hunted beast, and we could not either of us look in his face. How we would manage when we got back to the very place we had not troubled to think. He had not seemed so sure that we would not be difficult. Nor was it. I never saw anything like the dash with which he flung himself at a particular spot in the side of the mound, and tore at it, so that in a very few minutes the greater part of his body were out of sight. We stood holding the coat and the bundle of handkerchiefs, and looking very fearfully, I must admit, about us. There were nothing to be seen. A line of dark firs behind us made one skyline, more trees and the church tower half a mile off, the only right, cottages and a windmill on the horizon to the left, calm at sea, dead in front of us, faint barking of a dog at a cottage and a gleaming dyke between us and it. Full moon making that path we knew across the sea, the eternal whisper of the Scotch firs just above us and of the sea in front. Yet in all this quiet, an acute and acrid conscious of a restrained hostility very near us, like a dog on a leash that might be let go at any moment. Paxton pulled himself out the hole and stretched a hand back to us. "Give it to me," he whispered, unwrapped. We pulled off the handkerchiefs and he took the crown. The moonlight just fell on it as he snatched it. We had not ourselves touched it, that bit of metal, and I had the thought since they were just as well. In another moment, Paxton was out the hole again and busy shoveling back the soil with hands that were already bleeding. He would have none of our help, though. It was much the longest part of the job to get the place to look undisturbed, yet I don't know how he made it a wonderful success of it. At last he was satisfied and we turned back. We was a couple of 100 yards from the hill when Long finally said to him, "I say, you've left your coat there. That won't do, see?" And I certainly did see it. The long dark overcoat lying where the tunnel had been. Paxton had not stopped, however. He only shook his head and held up the coat over his arm. And when we joined him, he said without any excitement, but as if nothing mattered anymore, "That wasn't my coat." And indeed, when we looked back again, that dark thing was not to be seen. Well, we got out onto the road and came rapidly back the way. It was well before 12 when we got in, trying to put a good face on it and saying, Long and I, what a lovely night it were for a walk. The Boots was on the lookout for us, and we made remarks like that for his edification as we entered the hotel. He gave another look up and down the seafront before he locked the front door and said, "You don't meet many people about, I suppose, sir?" "No, indeed, not a soul," I said, at which I remember Paxton looked oddly at me. Only I thought I saw someone turn at the station road after you gentlemen," said the boots. "Still, you were three together, and I don't suppose he meant mischief." I didn't know what to say. Long merely said good night, and we went off upstairs, promising to turn out all the lights and to go to bed in a few minutes. Back in our room, we did our very best to make Paxton take a cheerful view. "There's the crown safe back," we said. "Very likely you'd have done better not to touch it," and he heavily assented to that. But no real harm has been done, and we shall never give this away to anyone who would be so mad as to go near it. Besides, don't you feel better yourself? "I don't mind confessing it all," I said. "On the way there I was very much inclined to take your view about, being followed. But going back it wasn't at all the same thing, was it? No, it wouldn't do. You've nothing to trouble yourself about." "Oh no." "You've nothing to trouble yourself about," he said, "but I'm not forgiven. I've got to pay for that miserable sacrilege still. I know what you're going to say. The church might help, yes, but it's the body that has to suffer. It's true I'm not feeling that he's waiting outside for me just now, but..." Then he stopped. Then he turned to thanking us, and we put him off as soon as we could, and naturally we pressed him in to use our sitting room next day, and said we should be glad to go out with him. Did he play golf, perhaps? Yes, he did, but he didn't think he should care about that tomorrow. Well, we recommended him to get up late and sit in our room in the morning while we were playing, and we would have a walk later in the day. We were very submissive and piano about it all, ready to do just what we thought best, but clearly quite certain in his own mind that what would come and could not be averted or palliated. You wonder why we didn't insist on accompanying him to his room and seeing him safe into the care of a brother or someone. The fact was he had nobody. He had a flat in town, but lately he had made up his mind to settle for time in Sweden, and he'd dismantled his flat and shipped off his belongings, and were away a fortnight or 3 weeks before he made the start. Anyhow, we didn't see what we could do better than sleep on it, and not sleep very much in my case, and see what we felt like tomorrow morning. We felt very different, Long and I, on as beautiful an April morning as you could desire, and Paxton also looked very different when we saw him at breakfast. "The first approach to a decent night's sleep night I seem to have had," was what he said. "We were going to do as we had settled, stay in probably all the morning and come out with us later. We went to the links, we met some other men and played with them in the morning, and had lunch there rather early so as not to be late back. All the same, the snares of death overtook him. Where it could have been prevented I don't know. I think he would have been gotten somehow, do what we might. Anyhow, this is what happened. We went straight up to our room. Paxton were there, reading quite peacefully. Ready to come out shortly," said Long. "Say in half an hour's time?" "Certainly," he said, and I said we would change first, perhaps have a bath and call for him in half an hour. I had my bath first and went and laid down in my bed and slept for about 10 minutes. We come out of our rooms at the same time and went together to the sitting room. Paxton wasn't there, only his book. Nor in his room, nor in the downstairs room. We shouted for him. A servant came out and said, "Why, I thought you gentlemen had gone out already, and so did the other gentleman. He heard you were calling him from the path there and ran out in a hurry. I looked out of the coffee room window, but I didn't see you. However, he ran off down the beach that way." Without a word, we ran that way too, the opposite direction to that of the last night's expedition. It wasn't quite 4 o'clock, and the day were fair, though not so fair as it had been, so there was really no reason to say for anxiety. With people about, surely a man couldn't come to much harm. But something in our look as we ran out must have struck the servant, for she came out on the steps and pointed and said, "Yes, that's the way you went." We ran on as far as the top of the shingle bank, and there pulled up. There were a choice of ways, past the houses on the seafront or along the sand at the bottom of the beach, which the tide being now out were fairly broad. Or of course we might keep along the shingle between these two tracks and have some view of both of them, only that were heavy going. We chose the sand, for that were the loneliest, and someone might come along there without being seen from the public path. Long said he saw Paxton some distance ahead, running and waving his stick as if he wanted to signal to people who were on ahead of him. I couldn't be sure, only his sea mist were coming up very quickly from the south. There was someone, that's all I could say, and there were tracks on the sand of someone running with wore shoes, and there were other tracks made before those, where the shoes sometimes trodden them, and interfered with them as someone not in shoes. Of course, it's only my word you've got to take for all this. Long's dead, with no time or means to make sketches or take casts, and the next tide washed everything away. All we could do was notice these marks as we hurried on. But there they were over and over again, and we had no doubt whether what we saw were the tracks of a bare foot, and one that showed more bones than flesh. The notion of Paxton running after anything like this, and supposing it to be the friends he were looking for, were very dreadful to us. You can guess what we fancied. How the thing you were following might stop suddenly and turn round on him, and what sort of face it would show, half seen at first in the mist, which all the while were getting thicker and thicker. And as I run on wondering how the poor wretch could have been lured and mistaken that other thing for us, I remembered his saying, "He has some power of your own." And then I wondered what the end would be, for I had no hope now that the end could be averted, and where. There's no need to tell all the dismal and horrid thoughts that flitted through my head as we ran on into the mist. They were uncanny too. The sun should still be bright in the sky and we could see nothing. We could only tell we were now past the houses and had reached the gap there is between them and the old Martello Tower. When you are past the tower, you know, there is nothing but shingles for a long way. Not an house, not a human creature. Just a spit of land, or rather shingles, with a river on your right and the sea on your left. But just before that, just by the Martello Tower, you remember there is an old battery, close to the sea. I believe there are only a few blocks of concrete left now. The rest has all been washed away. About this time there were a lot more. That place were a ruin. Well, when we got there, we clambered to the top, quick as we could, to take a breath, and look over the shingle in front, if by chance the mist would let us see anything. But a moment's rest we must have. We'd run a mile at least. Nothing whatever were visible ahead of us. We were just turning by common consent to get down and run hopelessly on when we heard what I can only call a laugh. And if you can understand what I mean by a breathless, a lungless laugh, you have it. I don't suppose you can. It come from below. We swerved away into the mist. That were enough. We bent over the wall. Paxton were there at the bottom. You don't know to be told he was dead. His tracks showed that he had run along the side of the battery and turned sharp round the corner of it, and small doubt of it must have dashed straight into the open arms of somebody who were waiting there. His mouth was full of sand and stones, and his teeth and jaw were broken to bits. I only glanced once at his face. In the same moment, just as we were scrambling down from the battery to get the body, we heard a shout and saw a man running down the bank of the Martello Tower. He was the caretaker stationed there, and his keen old eyes had managed to descry through the mist that something was wrong. They had seen Paxton fall, and had seen us moments after running up. Fortunately, for otherwise we could hardly escape suspicion of being concerned in the dreadful business. Had he, we asked, caught sight of anybody attacking our friends? He could not be sure. We sent them off for help, and stayed by the dead man till they came with the stretcher. It was then we traced out how he had come, on a narrow fringe of sand under the battery wall. The rest was shingle, and it were hopelessly impossible to tell whither the other had gone. What were we to say at the inquest? It were a duty, we felt, not to give up. Then and there the secret of the crown would be published in every paper. I don't know how much you would have told, but what we agreed upon was this. So that we had only made acquaintance with Paxton the day before, and he had told us he were under some apprehension of danger at the hands of a man called William Agar. Also that we had seen some other tracks beside Paxton's when we followed him along the beach. But of course by that time everything were gone from the sand. No one had any knowledge, fortunately, of any William Agar living in the district. The evidence of the man at the Martello Tower freed us from suspicion. All that could be done was to return a verdict of wilful murder by some person or persons unknown. Paxton was so totally without connection that all the inquiries that were subsequently made ended in no thoroughfare. And I've never been at Seaborough, or even near it, since. That's the end of the piece. Gonna have a quick drink. And then we'll go over some of the details. So first things first, for those of you who aren't familiar, a Martello Tower is a type of sea defence fortification set up around the coast of England, I think prior to or during the First World War. I think based on the time this is set on, it would have to be the First World War, because I think this is prior to the Second World War. And they are essentially they're pillboxes, or like large concrete bunkers with outward-facing sea guns. Well, by the time I was ever in one, they were as decommissioned. But yeah, the idea. The best way to think of them is if you can picture like a sandcastle made from like one of those cheap little pails that kids have, just a completely sort of rounded structure that sort of tapers towards the top. If you imagine a stunty one of them made out of concrete, that's sort of what they look like. Just to give you some idea of what a Martello Tower is if you're not familiar. Now, as to the rest of the story, it's interesting. You get quite a lot of folklore like this across England. There's quite a lot of what you call distinctly regional folklore. Like he mentioned that the heraldry was of East Anglia. Like, England prior to the time of William the Conqueror, 1066, was actually a little different kingdoms. Really, it wasn't one unified place, and each little place had its own sort of unique cultural history before that time. The various tribes, the Roman remnants, the various warlords and people who held it and such. And so there's quite a lot of little, what you got folklore like that is quite, how do you say, sporadic, regional, even in quite a small island. And so it's not uncommon for you to have a story like this. I think probably there's been enough collection of history and folklore nowadays that any such stories would have been, rounded up by academics. But yeah, for the time period, it was quite common to find, a little local legend that no one had ever really heard of being spread about. And the Holy Crowns thing, I mean, I've never heard of that particular legend, but it is very much the sort of thing that pops up into local folklore. What else? I mean, obviously, you have, other than that, it's a pretty standard ghost story. You've got a mystical artifact being protected by a lineage of people, all of whom are dead. Then some fella goes, digs it up, and gets haunted by the ghosts of the Guardians, presumably the Guardians, until he returns it, and then even after returning it, is punished for his wicked deeds. Yeah, I don't think there's too much to it beyond that. It's interesting. You have the sort of, I don't know. It's odd to me that you have almost a red herring in the story, though, with the fellow. I'm terrible names. The second fellow who is there with the narrator. We're told at the start of the story that he died, but it's not related to the story at all. He's just dead now. Which, I don't know. I was expecting him to sort of pop his clogs somewhere along the way. But I mean, I guess it led to the ending being a bit more unexpected than it was. But yeah. Other than that, I think the stand-up thing about this piece really is the description of the ghost of power, the ability to play a trick on your eyes. I mean, it's not an unusual ability, illusion or whatever, deception. It's fairly standard for a supernatural entity of that type to have. But the description of it is pretty harrowing. The idea that it's not invisible, it's there, but it just makes it so your eyes can't see it. And especially the description of coming back from the first excavation, where everyone else can see this figure, seems to be able to see this figure, but he can't. That's quite a creepy little bit. I'll give that props. Yeah, I think that's about it really, in terms of standouts. So unless someone has a question, or something else that they want to go over, I'll move on to the ashtray. After maybe another drink of water. Right. So then, the ashtray. Everyone who has travelled over eastern England knows the smaller country houses with which it is studded. Rather dang little buildings, usually in the Italian style, surrounded with parks or some 80 to 100 acres. For me, they have always had a very strong attraction, with the grey pale and the split oak, the noble trees and the meres with their red beets, and the line of distant woods. Then I like the pillared portico, perhaps stuck on a red brick Queen Anne house, which has been faced with stucco to bring it into line with the Grecian taste at the end of the 18th century. The hall inside, going up to the roof, which will always be provided with a gallery and a small organ. I like the library too, where you might find anything from Psalter of 13th century to a Shakespearean quarter. I like the pictures, of course, and perhaps most of all I like fancying what life in such an house was when it was first built, and the piping times of the landlord's prosperity, not least now when, if money is not so plentiful, taste is more varied, and life quite as interesting. I wish to have one of these houses. I wish to have one of these houses and enough money to keep it together and entertain my friend in its modesty. This is a digression. I have to tell you of a curious series of events which happened in such an house as I've tried to describe. It is Castringham, all in Suffolk. I think a good deal has been done to the building since the period of my story, but their essential features I have sketched are still there. Italian portico, square block of white house, older inside than out, park with a fringe of woods and near. One feature that marked out the house from a score of others is gone. And as you looked at it from the park, you saw on the right a great old ash tree growing within a half dozen yards of the wall, and almost or quite touching the building with its branches. I suppose it had stood there ever since Castringham ceased to be a fortified place, and since the moat were filled in, and the Elizabethan dwelling house built. At any rate, it has well nigh attained its full dimension in the year. It had well nigh attained its full dimension in the year 1690. In that year, the district in which the Hall is now situated was the scene of a number of witch trials. It will be long, I think, before we arrive at a just estimate of the amount of solid reasons, if there was any, which lay at the root of that universal fear of witches in the old times. Whether the persons accused of this offence really did imagine they were possessed of unusual powers of any kind, or whether they had the will, at least, if not the power, of doing mischief to their neighbours, or without all the confessions, of which there were so many, were extorted by the mere cruelty of their witch-finders. These are questions which are not, I fancy, yet solved, and the present narrative gives me pause. I cannot altogether sweep it away as mere invention. The reader must judge it for himself. Castringham contributed a victim to the auto de fe. Mrs. Mothersole were her name, and she differed from the ordinary run of village witches only in being rather better off and more influential position. Efforts was made to save her by several reputable farmers of the parish. They did their best to testify to her character and showed considerable anxiety as to the verdict of the jury. What seems to have been fatal to the woman was the evidence of the then proprietor of Castringham Hall, Sir Matthew Fell. He had opposed to having watched her on 3 different occasions from his window at the full moon, gathering sprigs from the ash tree near my house. She had climbed into the branches, clad only in her shirt, and were cutting off small twigs with a peculiarly curved knife, and as she did so she seemed to be talking to herself. On each occasion Sir Matthew had done his best to capture the woman, but she had always taken alarm at some accidental noise he had made, and all he could see when he got down to the garden were an hare running across the park in the direction of the village. On the 3rd night he had been at the pains to follow at his best speed, and had gone straight to Mrs. Mothersole's house. He had to wait a quarter of an hour battering at her door, and then she had come out very cross and apparently very sleepy, as if just out of bed. He had no good explanation to offer of his visit. Mainly on this evidence, though there were much more of a less striking and unusual kind from other parishioners, Mrs. Mothersole was found guilty and condemned to die. She was hanged a week after the trial, with 5 or 6 more unhappy creatures. Bury St Edmunds. Sir Matthew Fell, then Deputy Sheriff, was present at the execution. It was a damp, drizzly March morning when the cart made its way up the rough grass hill outside Northgate, where the gallows stood. The other victims were apathetic or broken down with misery. Mrs. Mothersole was, as in life, so in death, of very different temper. Poisonous rage, as a reporter at the time puts it, did so work upon the vain standards, yea, even after the hangman, that it was constantly affirmed on all that saw her that she presented the living aspect of a mad devil. Yet she offered no resistance to the officers of the law. Only she looked upon those that laid hands upon her with so direful and venomous an aspect that, as one of them afterwards assured me, that the mere thought of it played inwardly upon his mind for 6 months after. However, all that she is reported to have said was the seemingly meaningless words, "There will be guests at the hall," which she repeated more than once in an undertone. Sir Matthew Fell was not unimpressed by the bearing of the woman. He had some talk upon the matter with the vicar of his parish, with whom he had travelled home after the Assar business were over. His evidence at the trial had not been very willingly given. He was not specially infected with the witch-finding mania, but he declared then and afterwards that he could not give any other account of the matter than he had given, and that he could not possibly have been mistaken as to what he saw. The whole transaction had been repugnant to him, for he was a man who liked to be on pleasant terms with those about him, but he saw a duty to be done in this business, and he had done it. That seems to be the gist of his sentiments, and the vicar applauded it as any reasonable man must have done. A few weeks after, when the moon and May were at the full, vicar and squire met again in the park and walked to the hill together. Lady Fell were with her mother, who was dangerously ill, and Sir Matthew were alone at home, so the vicar, Mr. Crone, were easily persuaded to take a late supper at the hall. Sir Matthew were not very good company this evening. The talk ran chiefly on family and parish matters, and, as luck would have it, Sir Matthew made a memorandum in writing of certain wishes or intentions of his regarding his estate, which afterwards proved exceedingly useful. When Mr. Crone thought of starting for home about 9:30, Sir Matthew and he took a preliminary turn on the gravel walk sat at the back of the house. The only incident that struck Mr. Crone was this. They were in sight of the ash tree, which I described as growing near the windows of the building, when Sir Matthew stopped and said, "What is that runs up and down the stem of the ash? There's never a squirrel. They will all be in their nest by now." The vicar looked and saw the moving creature, but he could make nothing of its colour in the moonlight. The sharp outline, however, seen for an instant, were imprinted on his brain, and he could have sworn, he said, though it sounded foolish, that squirrel or not, it had more than 4 legs. Still, not much would have been made of the monster, the momentary vision, and the 2 men parted. They may have met since then, but were not for a score of years. Next day, Sir Matthew Fell were not downstairs at 6 in the morning, as we were accustomed, nor at 7, nor yet at 8. Thereupon the servants went and knocked on his chamber door. I need not prolong the description of their anxious listening and renewed batterings on the panels. The door opened at last from the outside, and they found their master dead and black. So much you have guessed. That there were any marks of violence did not at the moment appear, but the window was open. One of the men went to fetch the parson, and then by his directions rode on to give notice to the coroner. Mr. Crome himself went in as quick as he might to the hall, and he was shown the room where the dead man lay. He has left some notes among his papers which show how genuine and respect and sorrow were felt for Sir Matthew. There is also this passage, which I transcribe for the sake of the light that it throws upon the course of events, and also upon the common belief at the time. There were not any the least trace of an entrance having been forced into the chamber. The casement stood open, as my poor friend would always have it in this season. He had his evening drink of small ale in a silver vessel of about a pint measure, and tonight had not drunk it out. This drink was examined by the physician from Bury and Mr. Hodgkins, who could not, however, as he afterwards declared upon his oath before the coroner's quest, discover that any matter of a venomous kind was present in it. For, as was natural in the great swelling and blackness of the corpse, there was talk made upon the neighbour of poison. The body was very much disordered as it lay in the bed, being twisted after so extreme a sort as to give too probable conjecture that my worthy friend and patron had expired in great pain and agony. And what is as yet unexplained to myself, and the argument of some horrid and artful design in the perpetrators of this barbarous murder, was this, that the women which were entrusted with the laying out of corpse and washing it, being both sad persons and very well respected in their mournful procession, came to me in a great pain and distress, both of mind and body, saying what was indeed confirmed upon the first view. They had not sooner touched the breast of the corpse with their naked hand, than they were sensible of a more than ordinary violent smart and aching in their palms, which, with their whole forearms in no long time, swelled so immoderately, that pain still continuing, that as after proved during many weeks, they were forced to lay by the exercise of their calling, and yet no mark seen on the skin. Upon hearing this, I sent for the physician, who was still in the house, and who made as careful a proof as we were able to by the help of small magnifying lens of crystal of the condition of the skin on this part of the body, but could not detect with the instrument we had any matter of importance beyond a couple of small puncture or pricks, which we then concluded were the spots by which poison might be introduced, remembering the ring of Pope Borgia, with other known specimens of the horrid art of the Italian poisons of the last age. So much is to be said of the symptoms seen in the corpse. As to what I am to add, it is merely my own experiment, and to be left to posterity to judge whether there be anything of value therein. There was on the table by the bedside a Bible of the small size, in which my friend, punctual as in matters of less moment, so in this more weighty one, used nightly, and upon his first rising, to read a set portion, and I taking it up, not without a tear duly paid to him, which from the study of this poorer admiration were now passed to the contemplation of its great original, it came into my thoughts, as at such a moment of helplessness we are prone to catch at the least glimmer that makes promise of light, to make trial of that old, and by many accounts superstitious practice, of drawing the sword test, of which a principal instance, in the case of his late sacred majesty, the blessed martyr King Charles and my Lord Falkland, was now very much talked of. I must needs admit that by my trial not much assistance was afforded to me, yet, as the cause and origin of these dreadful events may hereafter be searched out, I set down the results, in the case it may be found that they pointed the true quarter of the mischief to acquire a quicker intelligence than my own. I made then 3 trials, opening the book and placing my finger upon certain words, which gave in the first these words, from Luke the 8th, chapter 7, cut it down, in the second Isaiah 13:20, it shall never be inhabited, and upon the third experiment, Job 39:30, her young ones also suck up a blood. This is all that needs to be quoted from Mr. Crome's papers. Sir Matthew Fell was duly confined and laid in the earth, and his funeral sermon, preached by Mr. Crome on the following Sunday, have been printed under the title of The Unsearchable Way, or England's Danger in the Malicious Dealings of Antichrist. it being the vicar's view, as well, that most commonly held in the neighbourhood, that the squire was the victim of a recrudescence of the Popish plot. His son, Sir Matthew II, succeeded the title and estates, and so ends the first act of the Castringham tragedy. It is to be mentioned, though, the fact is not surprising that the new baronet did not occupy the room in which his father had died, nor indeed were it slept in by anyone but an occasional visitor during the whole of his occupancy. He died in 1735, and I do not find that anything particular marked his reign, save a curiously constant mortality among his cattle and livestock in general, that showed a tendency to increase slightly as time went on. Those who are interested in the details will find statistical accounts in a letter to the Gentleman's Magazine of 1772, which draws the facts from the baronet's own papers. He put an end to it at last by a very simple expedient, that of shutting up all his beasts in sheds at night, and keeping no sheep in his park, for he had noticed that nothing were ever attacked and spent the night indoors. After that, the disorder confined itself to wild birds and beasts of chase. But as we have no good account of symptoms, and as all my night watching were quite unproductive of any clue, I do not dwell on what the Suffolk farmers called the Castringham sickness. The second Sir Matthew died in 1735, as I said, and was duly succeeded by his son Sir Richard. It were in his time the great family pew were built on the north side of the parish church. So large were the squire's ideas that several of the graves on the unhallowed side of the building had to be disturbed to satisfy his requirements. Among them were that of Mrs. Mothersole, a position of which were accurately known thanks to a note on a plan of the church and the yard, both made by Mr. Crumb. A certain amount of interest were excited in the village when it were known that the famous witch, who was still remembered by a few, was to be exhumed, and the feeling of surprise and indeed disquiet were very strong when it was found that, though her coffin were fairly sound and unbroken, there were no trace whatever inside it of body, bones, or dust. Indeed, it is a curious phenomenon. At the time of her burying, no such things were dreamed of as resurrection men, and it is difficult to conceive any rational motive for stealing the body otherwise than for the uses of the dissection room. The incident revived for a time all the stories of witch trials and the exploits of the witches, dormant for 40 years, and Sir Richard's orders that the coffin should be burnt were thought good by many. And Sir Richard's orders that the coffin should be burnt were thought by a good many to be rather foolhardy, though they were duly carried out. Sir Richard were a pestilent innovator, it is certain. Before his time the hall had been a farm block of the mellowest red brick. The Sir Richard had travelled in Italy and become infected with the Italian taste, and having more money than his predecessors, he determined to leave an Italian palace where he had found an English house. So stucco, an ashlar, master brick, some indifferent Roman marbles were planted about the entrance hall and gardens. A reproduction of the Sibyl's temple at Tripoli were erected on the opposite bank of the mere, and Castringham took on an entirely new and I must say a less engaging aspect. It were much admired and served as a model of a good many of the neighbouring gentry in after years. One morning, it were in 1754, Sir Richard woke after a night of discomfort. It had been windy and his chimney had smoked persistently, and yet it was so cold that he must keep up a fire. Also something that so rattled about the window that no man could get a moment's peace. Further, there was the prospect of several guests of position arriving in the course of the day, who would expect sport of some kind, and the inroads of the distemper, which continued among his game, had been lately so serious that he were afraid for his reputation as a game preserver. But what really touched him most nearly was the other matter of his sleepless night. He could certainly not sleep in that room again. That was the chief subject of his meditations at breakfast, and after he began a systematic examination of the rooms to see which would suit his notions best. It was long before he found one. This had a window with an eastern aspect, and that had a window with an eastern aspect, and that with a northern. This door the servants would always be passing, and he did not like the bedstead in that. No, he must have a room with a western lookout, so that the sun could not wake him early, and it must be out of the way of the business of the house. The housekeeper at the end of her resources. Well, Sir Richard, she said, you know that there is but one room like that in the house. Which may that be? Says Sir Richard. And that is Sir Matthew's, the west chamber. Look, put me in there, for they are on light tonight, said her master. Which way is it? Here, to be sure. And he hurried off. Oh, Sir Richard, but hardly no one has slept in there for 40 years. The air has hardly been changed since Sir Matthew died in there. Thus she spoke and rushed off after him. Come, open the door, Miss Cherry, I'll see the chamber at least. So it were open, and indeed the smell were very close and earthy. Sir Richard crossed to the window, and impatiently, as is were wont, threw the shutters back and flung open the casement. For this end of the house were one which the alterations had barely touched, grown up as it was with a great ash tree, and being otherwise concealed from view. Aired Miss Chiddock all day today, and moved my bed furniture in the afternoon, with the Bishop of Kilmore in my old room. Pray, Sir Richard, said a new voice breaking on the speech, might I have the favour of a moment's interview? Sir Richard turned around and saw a man in black in the doorway about. I must ask your indulgence for this intrusion, Sir Richard. You will perhaps hardly remember me. My name is William Crome, and my grandfather was vicar here when your grandfather's time. Well, sir, said Sir Richard, in the name of Crome is always a passport in Castringham. I am glad to renew a friendship of 2 generations' standing. In what can I serve you? For your hour of calling, and if I do not mistake you, your bearing, shows you to be in some haste. That is no more than the truth, sir. I am riding from Norwich to Bury St. Edmunds with what haste I can make, and I have called in on my way to leave with you some papers which we have just come upon in looking over what my grandfather left at his death. It is thought you may find some matters of family interest in them. You are mighty obliging, Mr. Crumb, and if you will be so good as to follow me to the parlour and drink a glass of wine, we'll take first look at these papers together. And you, Miss Chiddock, as I said, be about airing this chamber? Yes, it is in here my grandfather died. Yes, the tree, perhaps. Does it make the place a little dampish? No. I don't wish to listen any more. Make no difficulties, I beg. You have your orders. Go. Will you follow me, sir? They went to the study. The packet which young Mr. Crome had brought, he would just then become a fellow of Clare Hall in Cambridge, I must say, and subsequently brought out a respectable education of Polyaenus, contained among other things the note which the old victor had made upon the occasion of Sir Matthew Fell's death. And for the first time Sir Richard was confronted with the enigmatical sortes biblica which you have heard. They amused him a good deal. Well, he said, my grandfather's Bible gave one prudent piece of advice: cut it down. If that stands for the ashtray, he may rest assured I shall not neglect it. Such a nest of caterers and args was never seen. The parlour contained the family books, which, pending the arrival of the collection which Sir Richard had made in Italy, and the building of the proper room to receive them, were not many in number. Sir Richard looked up from the paper of the bookcase. I wonder, said he, whether the old prophet is there yet. I fancy I see him. Crossing the room, he took out a dumpy Bible, which, sure enough, bore the fly-leaf inscription, "To Matthew Fell, from his loving godmother, Anne Aldous, September 1659. It would be no bad plan to test him again, Mr. Crome. I will wager we get a couple of names in the chronicles. What have we here? Thou shalt seek me in the morning, and I shall not be. Well, well. Your grandfather would have made a fine omen of that, eh? No more profits for me, they are all in tail. And now, Mr. Crome, I am infinitely obliged for your packet. You will, I fear, be impatient to get on. Pray allow me another glass. So with the offers of hospitality, which were genuinely meant, for Sir Richard thought well of the young man's address and manner, they parted. In the afternoon come the guests, the Bishop of Kilmore, Lady Mary Irving, Sir William Kempfield, etc. Dinner at 5, wine, cards, supper, and dispersal to bed. Next morning, Sir Richard is disinclined to take his gun with the rest. He talks with the Bishop of Kilmore. This prelate, unlike a good many of the Irish bishops of his day, had visited his see, indeed resided there for some considerable time. This morning, as the two were walking along the terrace and talking over the alterations and improvements in the house, the bishop said, pointing to the window of the west room, "You could never get one of my Irish flock to occupy that room, Sir Richard." "Why is that, my lord? It is in fact my own room. But our Irish peasantry will always have it that it brings the worst luck to sleep near an ash tree. You have a fine growth of ash not 2 yards from your chamber window. Perhaps," the bishop went on with a smile, "it has given you a touch of its quality already, for you do not seem, if I may say it, so much the fresher for your nights as your friend would like to see you." Pausing for a second to kill a bot. Killed. That, or something else, is true. Cost me my sleep from 12 to 4, my lord. And the tree is to come down tomorrow, so I shall not hear much more from it. I applaud your determination. It can hardly be wholesome to have the air you breathe strained, as it were, through all that leafage. Your lordship is right there, I think. But I had not my window open last night. It was rather the noise that went on, no doubt from the twigs sweeping the glass, that kept me open-eyed. I think that can hardly be, Sir Richard. Here, you see it from this point. None of these near branches can even touch your casement, unless there were a gale, and there were none of that last night. And Mr. Payne's barefoot. No, sir, true. What then will it be, I wonder, that scratched and rustled so? I and covered the dust of my sill with lines and marks. At last they agreed that the rats must have come up through the ivy. That was the bishop's idea, and Sir Richard jumped at it. So the day passed quietly, and the night come, and the party dispersed to their rooms and wished Sir Richard a better night. And now we were in his bedroom, with the light out, and the squire in bed. The room is over the kitchen, and the night outside is still and warm, so the window stands open. There's very little light about their bedstead. There's a strange movement now. It seems as if Sir Richard were moving his head rapidly to and fro, rather than the slightest possible sound. And now you would guess, so deceptive is the art darkness, that he had several heads, round and brownish, which to move back and forward, even as low as his chest did. It is an horrible illusion, is it nothing more? There, something drops off the bed with a soft plump, like a kitten, and is out of the window in a flash. Another, 4, and after there is quiet again. Thou shalt seek me in the morning, and I shall not be. As was Sir Matthew, so was Sir Richard, dead and black in his bed. A pale and silent party of guests and servants gathered under the window when the news were known. Italian poisoners, popish emissaries, infected air. All these and more guesses were hazarded, for the Bishop of Kilmore looked at the tree in the fork of which, whose lower boughs a white tomcat were crouching, looking down on the olive which years had gnawed in the trunk. They were watching something inside the tree with great interest. Suddenly it got up and craned over the olives. Then a bit of the edge on which it stood gave way, and it went slithering in. They really looked up at the noise of the fall. It is known to most of us that a cat can cry. A few of us have heard, I hope, such a yell as come out of the trunk of the great ash. 2 or 3 screams there was, the witnesses are not sure which, and then a slight and muffled noise of some commotion or struggling with all that come. But Lady Mary Irby fainted outright, and the housekeeper stopped her ears and fled till she fell on the terrace. The Bishop of Kilmore and Sir William Kentfield stayed. Even they were daunted, they were only the cry of a cat, and Sir William swallowed once or twice before he could say, "There is something more than we know of in that tree, my lord. I am for an instant search." And this were agreed upon. A ladder were brought, and one or the gardeners went up, looking down the holler. Could detect nothing but a few dim indications of something moving. They got a lantern and let it down by rope. I must get to the bottom of this. My life upon it, my lord, but the secret of these terrible deaths is there. Up went the gardener again with the lantern and let it down the hole cautiously. They saw the yellow light upon his face as he bent over, and saw his face struck with an incredulous terror and loathing before he cried out in a dreadful voice, and fell back from the ladder, where happily he were caught by 2 of the men, letting the lantern fall inside the tree. He were in a dead faint, and it was some time before any word could be gotten from him. By then they had something else to look at. The lantern must have broken at the bottom, and the light of it caught upon dry leaves and rubbish that lay there, for in a few minutes the dense smoke began to come up, and then flame, and to be short, the tree were in a blaze. The bystanders made a ring at some yards distance, and Sir William and the Bishop sent men to get what weapons and tools they could, but clearly whatever might be used in the tree as its lair would be forced out by the fire. So it were. First at the fort they saw a round body covered with fire, the size of a man's head, appear, very suddenly, and seem to collapse and fall back. This 5 or 6 times. Then a similar ball leapt in the air and fell on the grass, where after a moment it lay still. The Bishop went as near as he dared to it and saw what but the remains of an enormous spider, veinous and seared. And as the fire burned lower down, more terrible bodies like this began to break out from the trunk, as it was seen they were covered with greyish hair. All that day the ash burned, until it fell to pieces, and the men stood about it, and from time to time killed the brutes as they dropped out. At last there were a long interval when none appeared, and they cautiously closed in and examined the roots of the tree. They found, says the Bishop of Kilmore, below it a rounded hollow place in the earth, wherein were 2 or 3 bodies of these creatures that had plainly been smothered by the smoke, and what is to me more curious, at the side of the den, against the wall, were crouching the anatomy or skeleton of a human being, with the skin dried upon the bones, having some remains of black hair, which were pronounced by those that examined it to be undoubtedly the body of a woman, and clearly dead for the period of 50 years. That's the end of that piece. That's an interesting one. Not so much a ghost story, although there's distinctly some supernatural elements to it. You've got giant evil spiders, which I must say seem to be certainly a common staple of horror in the modern day, but these stories are, I think, the better part of 100 years old, so it's probably quite ahead of its time in that. There's definitely something going on here that's on the supernatural side. We've got the corpse of your presumed witch, absent from our coffin and found in this thing. And she of course pronounced her terrible curse. There will be guests at the hall. Well, guests indeed. Eating the livestock and the game animals. And the people who leave their window open next to the ashtray. And of course, what else? Well, of course, the Bible part as well. The divination part of the Bible, cut down the tree, etc., etc. I'm not sure that's good advice the first time it was given when the Bible came out. Because it was cut it down, not burn it down. If you cut it down, presumably all the spiders were just to come out and eat you. But maybe not. Maybe they were still too small and you could have just squashed them. I don't know how evil magic spiders work. I will say, however, I've never heard the the provision against ashtrays. That's a new one on me. Never read that as a piece of Irish folklore. I generally think of ashtrays as quite wholesome types of trees. But, who's to say, really? What else is there? Not much. I mean, you got the little matter of the estates of the English country manor and all that. Design elements and, you know, some general prejudice against the Catholic Church, which, you know, period accurate. Protestantism and the Church of England, etc., etc. I do like the mention of the the Borgia ring, which I think were a real artifact. The Borgia Pope used a ring with a poison needle in, or at least it was rumoured to have. That's a neat little element. I don't think there's too much else to be broken down about this story, but yeah. It's an interesting little one. Well, it's narrated actually is a little bit interesting, I suppose. Because at points it's like it is an account of, you know, we found these papers and I'm thinking about this country house, but then there's a couple of moments where we're just in the scene. Especially in the last one when the Sir Richard died, we're just in his bedroom seeing things that no one could realistically have seen. I don't know. It's an odd narrative. It switches between sort of a didactic narrative and an external narrator and an omniscient sort of narration. Don't know. I do wonder about these stories that I've read. The M.R. James ones. Because a lot of them seem like they might just be accounts of things that he's been told by people. But this one definitely had some fictionalised elements in it. Whether that's him, you know, mixing in his account with some, you know, dramatisation, or if it's entirely made up, I don't know. Still a pretty good one. Hope none of you are afraid of spiders. Yeah. But anyhow, without any further ado, unless anyone has anything they want to say to me or do to me, or force me to do, I shall move on to the Rose Garden, which is the last of our tales for now. The Rose Garden. Mr. and Mrs. Anstruther were at breakfast in the parlour of Westfield Hall, in the country of Essex, or in the county of Essex, sorry. They were arranging plans for the day. George, said Mrs. Anstruther, I think you had better take care of the car to Malden and see if you can get any of those knitted things I was speaking about which would do for my stall at the bazaar. Oh, well, if you wish it, Mary, of course I can do that, but I had half arranged to play around with Geoffrey Williamson this morning. The bazaar isn't until Thursday of next week, is it? What has that to do with it, George? I should have thought you would have guessed that I can't get the things I want in Malden, and shall have to write to all manner of shops in town, and they are certain to send something quite unsuitable in price or quality the first time. If you actually made an appointment with Mr. Williamson, you had better keep it, and I must say I think you might have let me know. Oh, no, it wasn't really an appointment. I quite see what you mean. I'll go. And what shall you do yourself? Well, when the work of the house is arranged, for I must see to the laying out of my new rose garden. Now, by the way, before you start for Malden, I wish you would just take Collins to look at the place I've fixed upon. You know it, of course. Well, I'm not quite sure that I do, Mary. Is it at the upper end towards the village? Good gracious, no, my dear George. I thought I had made that quite clear. That's a small clearing just off the shrubbery path that goes towards the church. Oh yes, where we were staying, there must have been a summer house once. The place with the old seats and posts. Do you think there's enough sun there? My dear George, do allow me some common sense, and don't credit me with all your ideas about summer houses. Yes, there will be plenty of sun when we have got rid of some of those box bushes. I know what you were going to say, and I have as little wish as you to strip the place bare. All I want Collins to do is to clear away the old seats and the posts and things before I come out in an hour's time. And I hope you will manage to get off fairly soon. After luncheon, I think I shall go on with my sketch of the church. And if you please, you can go over the links, or... Ah, good idea, a very good idea. Yes, you finish that sketch, Mary, and I should be glad of a round. I was going to say you might call on the bishop, but I suppose it's no use my making any suggestion. And I do be getting ready, or half the morning will be gone. Mr. Anstruther's face, which had showed symptoms of lengthening, shortened itself again when he hurried from the room, and was soon given orders to in the passage. Mr. Anstruther, Mrs. Anstruther, a stately dame of some 15 summers, proceeded, after a second consideration of the morning's letters, to her housekeeper. Within a few minutes, Mr. Anstruther had discovered Collins in the greenhouse, and they were on their way to the site of the projected rose garden. I do not know much about the conditions and most suitable to these nurseries, but I'm inclined to believe that Miss Anstruther, in the habit of describing herself as a great gardener, had not been well advised in the selection of a spot for the purpose. It was a small, dank clearing, bounded on one side by a path, and on the other by thick box brushes, laurels, and other evergreens. The ground were almost bare of grass and dark of aspect. Remains of rustic seats and a corrugated oak post somewhere near the middle of the clearing had given rise to Miss Anstruther's conjecture that the summer house had once stood there. Clearly Collins had not been put in possession of his mistress's intention with regards to this part of ground, and when he learnt them from Mr. Anstruther he displayed no enthusiasm. Of course I could clear them seats away good enough, he said. They ain't no ornament in the place, Mr. Anstruther, and rotten too. Look here, sir. They broke up a large piece. Rotten right through. Yes, clear through. I'm away, to be sure we can do that. And the post, said Mr. Anstruther, that's got to go too. Collins advanced and shook the post with both hands, and he rubbed his chin. That's firm in the ground, that post is, he said. That's been there a number of years, Mr. Anstruther. I doubt I shan't get that up, not quite so soon as I can do with them streets. That's what quite so soon as what I can do with them seats. But your mistress specially wishes it to be gotten out of the way in an hour's time, said Mr. Anstruther. Collins smiled and shook his head slowly. You'll excuse me, sir, but you feel of it yourself. No, sir. No one can do what's impossible to him, can they, sir? I could get that post up by after tea time, sir, but that'll want a lot of digging. What you require, you see, sir, if you'll excuse me naming it, you want the soil loosened around the post here, and me and the boy, we should take a little time doing that. But now these here seats, said Collins, appearing to appropriate this position of the scheme. Appropriate this portion of the scheme is due to his own resourcefulness. Why, I can get the barrier round and have them cleared away in, less than an hour's time from now, if you'll permit it, only. Only what, Collins? Well, now, it ain't for me to go against orders, no more than what it is for yourself or anyone else. This added somewhat hurriedly. But if you'll pardon me, sir, this ain't the place. I should have picked that for another rose garden myself. Why, look at them boxing laurestinus, how they regular preclude the light from... Ah, yes, but we've got to get rid of some of them, of course. Oh, indeed, get rid of them. Yes, to be sure, but I beg your pardon, Mr. Anstruther. I'm sorry, Collins, but I must be getting on now. I hear the car at the door. Your mistress will explain exactly what she wishes. I'll tell her then that you can see your way to clearing away the seats at once, and the post this afternoon. Good morning. Collins will left open his chin. Mrs. Anstruther received the report with some discontent, but did not insist upon any change of plan. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, she had dismissed her husband to his golf, and had dealt faithfully with Collins and with the other duties of the day, and having sent a camp stool and umbrella at the proper spot, had just settled down to her sketch of the church as seen from the shrubbery, when a maid come hurrying down the path to report that Miss Wilkins had called. Miss Wilkins were one of the few remaining members of the family from whom the Anstruthers had bought the Westfield estate some few years back. She had been staying in the neighbourhood, and this was probably a farewell visit. Perhaps you could ask Miss Wilkins to join me here, said Miss Anstruther, and soon Miss Wilkins, a person of mature years, approached. Yes, I'm leaving to the Ashes tomorrow, and I shall be able to tell my brother how tremendously you've improved the place. Of course, he can't help regretting the old house just a little, as I do myself, but the garden is really delightful now. I'm so glad you can say so. You mustn't think we've finished our improvements. Let me show you where I mean to put a rose garden. It's close by here. The details of the project were laid out before Miss Wilkins at some length, but her thoughts were rather elsewhere. Yes, delightful, she said rather absently. But do you know, Miss Anstruther, I'm afraid I was thinking of old times. I'm very glad to have seen just this spot again before you altered it. Frank and I had quite a romance about this place. Yes, said Mr. Anstruther smilingly. Do tell me what it was. Something quite charming, I'm sure. No, not so very charming, but has always seemed to be curious. Neither of us will ever be here alone, and we were children, and I'm not sure that I should care about it now in certain moods. It is one of these things that can hardly be put into words, by me at least. And that sounds rather foolish if they are not properly expressed. I can tell you after a fashion what it was that gave us, well, an almost horror of this place when we were alone. It was towards the evening of one very hot autumn day, when Frank had disappeared mysteriously about the grounds. I was looking for him to fetch him for tea. And going down the path I suddenly saw him, not hiding in the bushes I rather expected, but sitting on the bench in the old summer house. There was a wooden summer house here, you know, up in the corner, asleep, with such a dreadful look on his face that I really thought he must be ill or even dead. I rushed at him and shook him and told him to wake up, and wake up he did with a scream. I assure you the poor boy seemed almost beside himself with fright. He hurried me away to the house and was in a terrible state all that night, hardly sleeping. Someone had to sit up with him, as far as I remember. He was better very soon, but for days I couldn't get him to say what he had been in such a condition. It came out at last that he had really been asleep and had a very odd, disjointed sort of dream. He never saw much of what was around him, but he felt the scenes most vividly. First, he made out that he was standing in a large room with a number of people in it, and someone was opposite him who was very powerful, and was being asked questions which he felt to be very important, and whatever he answered, someone else, either the person opposite him or someone else in the room, seemed to be, as he said, making something up against him. All the voices sounded to him very distant, but he remembered bits of the things that were said. Where were you on the 19th of October? And is this your handwriting? And so on. I could see now, of course, that he was dreaming of some trial. We were never allowed to see the papers. It was an odd thing for a boy of 8 should have such a vivid idea of what went on in the court. All the time he said, the most intense anxiety and oppression and hopelessness. I don't suppose he used such words as that to me. Then after that there was an interval in which he remembered being dreadfully restless and miserable, and there came another sort of picture when he was aware that he had come out of a door on a dark raw morning with little snow about it. It was in a street, or at any rate among houses, and he felt that there were numbers of people there too, and he was taken up some sort of creaking wooden steps and stood on a sort of platform. The only thing he could actually see was a small fire burning somewhere near him. Someone who had been holding his arm left hold of it, and he went towards the fire, and then he said the fright he was in was worse than in any other part of his dream, and if I had not wakened him up, he didn't know what would have become of him. A curious dream for a child to have, wasn't it? Well, so much for that. It must have been later in the year that Frank and I went here, and I was sitting in the arbour just about sunset. I noticed the sun was going down, and told Frank to run in and see if tea was ready while I finished a chapter in the book I was reading. Frank was away longer than I expected, and the light was going so fast I had to bend over my book to make it out. All at once I became conscious that someone was whispering to me inside the arbour. The only words I could distinguish, or thought I could distinguish, were something like, "Pull, pull, I'll push you, pull." I started up in something of a fright. The voice was little more than a whisper, sounded so hoarse and so angry, and yet as if it came from a long, long way off, just as it had done in Frank's dream. But though I was startled, I had enough courage to look around and try and make out where the sound came from. And this sounds very foolish, I know, but it's still the fact. I made sure that it was stronger when I put my ear to an old post which was part of the end of the seat. I was so certain of this that I remember making some marks on the post, as deep as I could with the scissors out of my work basket. I don't know why. I wonder, by the way, whether that isn't the very post itself. Well, yes, it might be. There are marks and scratches on it. One can't be sure. Anyhow, it was just like this post you have there. My father got to know that both of us had had a fright in the arbour, and he went down there himself one evening after dinner, and the arbour was pulled down at very short notice. I recollect hearing my father talking about it to an old man who used to do odd jobs in the place, and the old man saying, "Don't you fear for that, sir. He's fast enough in there without no one, and don't take. He's fast enough in there without no one. Don't take and let him out." When I asked who it was, I could get no satisfactory answer. Possibly my father or mother might have told me more about it when I grew up, but as you know, they both died when we were still quite children. I must say it has always seemed very odd to me. I have often asked the older people in the village whether they know of anything strange, but either they knew nothing or they wouldn't tell me. Dear, how I have been boring you with my childish remembrances. But indeed, that arbour did absorb our thoughts quite remarkably for a time. You can fancy, can't you, the kind of stories we made up for ourselves? Well, dear Mrs. Anstruth, I must be leaving you now. We shall meet in town this winter, I hope, shan't we? Etc., etc. The seats in the post were cleared away and uprooted respectively by the evening. Late summer weather is proverbially treacherous, and during dinner time Mrs. Collins sent up to ask for a little brandy, because her husband had took a nasty chill, and she were afraid he would not be able to do much next day. Mrs. Anstruther's morning reflections were not quite wholly placid. She saw some roughs had gotten into the plantation during the night. And another thing, George, the moment that Collins is about again, you must tell him to do something about the owls. I never heard anything like them, and I'm positive one came and perched somewhere just outside our window. If it had come in, I should have been out of my wits. It must have been a very large bird from its voice. Didn't you hear it? Of course not. You were sound asleep as usual. Still, I must say, George, you don't look as if your night had done you much good. My dear, I feel as if another of the same would turn me silly. I have no idea of the dreams I had. I couldn't speak of them when I woke up, and if this room wasn't so bright and sunny, I shouldn't care to think of them even now. Oh, really, George, that isn't very common with you, I must say. You must have... No, you only had what I had yesterday, unless you had a tea at that wretched clubhouse, did you? No, nothing but a cup of tea and some bread and butter. I should really like to know how I came to put my dream together, as I suppose one does put one's dream together from a lot of little things one has been seeing or reading. Look here, Mary, it was like this, if I shan't be boring you. I wish to hear what it was, George. I will tell you when I have had enough. All right. I must tell you that it wasn't like the other nightmares in one way, because I didn't really see anybody who spoke to me or touched me, and I was most fearfully impressed with the reality of it all. First I was moving about in an old-fashioned sort of panelled room. I remember there was a fireplace and a lot of burnt papers in it, and I was in a great state of anxiety about something. There was something else, the servant I suppose, because I remember saying to him, "Horses as quick as you can," and then waiting a bit. And next I heard several people coming upstairs and a noise like spurs on a boarded floor. And then the door opened and whatever it was that I was expecting happened. Yes, but what was that? You see, I couldn't tell. It's a sort of shock that upsets you in a dream. You either wake up or else everything goes black. That was what happened to me. Then I was in a big dark wardroom, panelled I think, like the other, and a number of people, and I was evidently standing your trial, I suppose, George. Goodness. Yes, Mary, I was. But did you dream that too? How very odd. No, I didn't get enough sleep for that. Go on, George, and I'll tell you afterwards. Yes, well, I was being tried for my life. I've no doubt from the state I was in. I had no one speaking for me, and somewhere there was but a most fearful fellow on the bench. I should have said only that he seemed to be pitching into me most unfairly, and revisiting everything I said and asking most abominable questions. What about? Why, dates when I was in particular places, and letters I was supposed to have written, and why I had destroyed some papers. I recollect his laughing at answers I made in a way that quite daunted me. It doesn't sound much, but I can tell you, Mary, it was really quite appalling at the time. I'm quite certain there was such a man once. A most horrible villain he must have been, the things he said. Thank you, I have no wish to hear about them. I can go to the links any day myself. How did it end? Oh, against me. He sorted out. I do wish, Mary, I could give you a notion of the strain that came after, and seemed to me for lost for days. Waiting, and sometimes writing things. I knew to be enormously important to me, and waiting for answers, and none coming. And after that I came out. What makes you say that? You know what sort of thing I saw? Was it a dark cold day, and snow in the streets, and a fire burning somewhere near you? By George, it was. You have had the same nightmare, really, not? Well, it's the oddest thing, yes. I've no doubt it was an execution by high treason. I know I was laid out on straw and jolted along most wretchedly, and then I had to go up some steps, and someone was holding my arm. I remember seeing a bit of a ladder and hearing the sound of a lot of people. I really don't think I could bear now to go into a crowd of people and hear the noise they make talking. Well, mercifully, I didn't get to the real business. The dream passed off with a sort of thunder inside my head. Mary, I know what you're going to ask. I suppose this is an instance of a kind of thought reading. Miss Wilkins called yesterday and told me of a dream her brother had as a child when they lived here. And something did no doubt make me think of that when I was awake last night, listening to those horrible owls, and those men talking and laughing in the shrubbery. By the way, I wish you would see if they have done any damage and speak to the police about it. And so I suppose from my brain you must have got into yours while you were asleep. Curious, no doubt, and I'm sorry to have given you such a bad night. But you'd better be as much of the fresh air as you can today. Oh, it's all right, but I think I will go over to the lodge and see if I can get a game with any of them. And you? I have enough to do for the morning. This afternoon, if I am not interrupted, there is my drawing. To be sure, I want to see that Linist very much. No damage was discovered in the shrubbery. Mr. Anstruther surveyed with a faint interest the site of the rose garden, where the uprooted post still lay, and the hole it had occupied remained unfilled. Collins, upon inquiry made, proved to be better, but quite unable to come to his work. He expressed by the mouth of his wife an hope that he hadn't done nothing wrong clearing away them things. Mrs. Collins added there were a lot of talking people in Westfield, and the old one was the worst. Seemed to think everything of them having been in the parish longer than what other people had. As to what they said, no more could be ascertained than it was they quite upset Collins and were a lot of nonsense. Recruited by lunch and a brief period of slumber, Mrs. Anstruther settled herself comfortably upon her sketching chair in the path leading through the shrubbery to the side gate of the churchyard. Trees and buildings were among her favourite subjects, and here she had got good studies of both. She worked hard, and the drawing was becoming a really pleasant thing to look upon by the time that the wooded hills to the west had shut off the sun. Still, she would have persevered, but the light changed rapidly, and it became obvious that the last touches must be added on the morrow. She rose and turned towards the house, pausing for a time to take the light in the limpid green western sky. Then she passed on between the dark box brushes, and at a point just before the path debouched on the lawn, she stopped once again and considered the quiet evening landscape, and made a mental note that must be the tower of one of the Ruthin churches at one quarter on the skyline. Then a bird, perhaps, rustled in the box bush on her left, and she turned and stared at seeing what was first she took to be the 5th of November mask peering out among the branches. She looked closer. It were not a mask, it were a face, large, smooth and pink. She remembers the minute drops of perspiration which were shifted from his forehead. She remembers how the jaws were clean shaven, the eyes shut. She remembers also, with an accuracy which makes the thought intolerable to her, how the mouth were open and a single tooth appeared below the upper lip. And she looked at the face, as she looked, the face receded into the darkness of the bush. The shelter of the house were gained and the door shut before she collapsed. Mr. and Mrs. Anstruther had been for a week or more recruiting at Brighton before they received a circular from the East Essex Archaeological Society and a query as to whether they possessed certain historical portraits which it would desire to include in the forthcoming work on Essex portraits, to be published under the Society's auspices. They were an accompanying letter from the Secretary, which contained the following passage. We are specially anxious to know whether you possess the original of the engravings of which I enclose a photograph. It represents name redacted, Lord Chief Justice under Charles II, who, as you doubtless know, retired after his disgrace to Westfield, and is supposed to have died there of remorse. It may interest you to hear that a curious entry has recently been found in the registers, not of Westfield, but of Prior Ruthin, to the effect that the parish was so much troubled after his death that the rector of Westfield summoned the parsons of all the Ruthins to come and lay him, which they did. The entry ends by saying, the stake is in a field adjoining the churchyard of Westfield on the west side. Perhaps you can let us know if any tradition to this effect is current in your parish. The incidents which the enclosed photograph recalled were productive of a severe shock to Miss Anstruther, who decided that she must spend the winter abroad. Mr. Anstruther, when he went down to Westfield to make the necessary arrangements, not unnaturally told his story to the rector, an old gentleman who showed little surprise. Really, I had managed to piece out for myself very much what must have happened, partly from other people's talk and partly from what I saw in your grounds. Of course, we have suffered to some extent also. It was bad at first, like owls, as you say, and men talking sometimes. One night it was in the garden, and at other times I've had several of the cottages. But lately there has been very little. I think it will die out. There is nothing in our registers except the entry of the burial, and what I for a long time took to be a family motto. The last time I looked at it, I noticed that it was added in a later hand, and had the initials of one of our rectors quite late in the 17th century. A.C. Augustin Crumpton. Here it is, you see. Quieta non movere, I suppose. Well, it is rather hard to say exactly what I do suppose. It is rather hard exactly to say what I do suppose. Quieta non movere. Silent move not. I'm not entirely sure of that. My Latin's not exactly up to scratch. I mean, it seems pretty clear what happened. This disgraced Chief Justice fellow does a lot of negative trials, retires in disgrace to this place, dies and becomes a restless spirit, and it takes all the parsons of the various churches nearby to come and bind his restless ghost to a place under a post, which these foolish folk dig up. Although being an old ghost seems like he's passing on pretty quickly. Similar enough story, not bad. There's something to it in some of the accounts. I think especially, I'll say again here, there's not a lot to a lot of the story, but the description of the haunting itself, this idea of remember, or this, I guess the dream, but not like the dream that is a memory, right, of sense, right, of not sight, but of feeling, of knowing these things happening. That's quite an interesting little perspective, I think, because it frames these experiences in a different way. Like if it was just an account, you know, it'd be, you know, it's a harrowing account to have. Being tried for murder, being badgered for crimes you didn't commit, going to the gallows, that's pretty grim. But you don't really think about it when you're reading it just as normal. But this odd description, this sort of strangeness to it, the alienation of it, feeling not seeing, the sense of it but not the thing of it, that lends something to it, I suppose. It gives it a sort of weight of, I guess just attention. You have to pay attention to it, you have to give it consideration. It makes it into something more, you know what I mean? It's a clever little trick, I think I admire it quite significantly. I do wish I had the land to sort of know the final thing. I'd ask Lamp, but he's already saying in my head that he won't tell me, so I guess if you want to know, you'll have to look it up. That is, I'll just give it to you a little more clearly. Quureta, Q-U-R-E-T-A, non N-O-N, Movere, M-O-V-E-R-E. If you want to look that up yourself. I would do it myself, but I am trapped in a library and have no access to... I should get a Latin dictionary, that'd be useful. There's probably one around somewhere. I have to look into it. Yeah, I imagine there's some meaning there, but I imagine it's something about the quiet dead or whatever. But yeah, all told, not a bad little story. And that is the last that we got today, so something to it. Not bad at all, but yeah. I like these. They're ghost stories and they're reasonably spooky, but they're not like horrifying, you know? You're not going to lose sleep over these probably. They're just nice enough to be chilling. I think I like M.R. James. I'm still not entirely sure whether these are original and completely fictitious, or if there's something of them in them of like accounts or whatever, but I think they're pretty solid overall. Anyhow, let's see about raiding now. Who can we raid into? Ash of the Fallen and Pindle Bear. I know Pindle Bear's still doing the charity live streams, so I suppose we'll raid into her. Seems a good cause. Yeah, we'll do that. Starting the raid now. And yeah. See you when I see you. Thanks for stopping by.
John Bunnybones has been bound to the library.